What does it look like to create and deliver a 10 out of 10 keynote? That's what we're talking about with my guest and client, Julia Korn, on this episode of the Speaking Your Brand podcast. More and more women are making an impact by starting businesses, running for office, and speaking up for what matters. With my background as a TV political analyst, entrepreneur, and speaker, I interview and coach purpose-driven women to shape their brands, grow their companies, and become recognized as influencers in their field. This is Speaking Your Brand, your place to learn how to persuasively communicate your message to your audience. Hi there, and welcome to the Speaking Your Brand podcast. I'm your host, Carol Cox. Have you ever seen a keynote delivered at a conference where you're like, wow, that was a 10 out of a 10. That was amazing, something that I didn't expect? Probably not, because let's face it, there are a lot of fantastic speakers out there, but there are also a lot of keynotes that we see that just kind of do the job, that share some content with you, maybe share some insights or some takeaways, but just really don't give you that multidimensional experience. Well, that's what we're talking about today with my guest, Julia Korn, because she recently delivered a 10 out of 10 keynote. And that is not me saying that. And that's not Julia saying that, although we are saying that. It was people in the audience and many people in the audience who went up to Julia and the event organizers afterwards and said, wow, that was amazing, including the AV and the sound people. And you know, they see a lot of keynotes at conferences. Julia is the founder and CEO of the Authenticity Guide, an executive coaching company that works with ambitious leaders. She also recently did a TEDx talk earlier this year called Break Up with Should in Your Career, which was named as a TED Editor's Pick of the Year. I'll include a link to that TEDx talk in the show notes as well. Julia, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Carol. I'm such a fan of yours and of the podcast, so it's a real honor to be here.
Well, I have had so much fun working with you. We started working together in the very beginning of August, and your keynote was just last week as of we're recording this, so November. And we worked really hard on this keynote, on not only the content, but so many of the different aspects of it. And so I want to really dig into what makes a 10 out of 10 keynote. Before we get there, though, let's talk about how did this keynote come about in the first place?
Yeah, so this was sort of a warm lead, if you will. And so I started off in my business not doing keynotes, which I know is common for many people. I was doing workshops. And when I started my business, I was giving workshops for free and getting footage and getting testimonials. And I had gotten to the point where I was giving workshops for money at conferences. And I gave a workshop at this exact conference 3 years ago before I had a child. And I loved the audience. I loved the event planners, and those went really well. And so I was able to keep those relationships warm over the years. And so when I reached back out to inquire about keynote slots, and yes, I reached back out, they already sort of knew who I was and knew that I had already received positive feedback from their audience and cared about their audience. And so I had circled back because of my fond feelings. And it was sort of like they wanted this mutual assurance that I cared about this audience. They had some social proof from me. And so it made sense to partner on a keynote because I pitched them a topic that they liked.
And I think this is such a great point that number one, you already had spoken there, so they were familiar with you, because I say that speaking is the best way to get more speaking engagements and to get higher profile speaking engagements, because they have to see you as a speaker and they have to know what you can do. But then the second thing is that you didn't wait for them to just kind of like dawn on them, oh, maybe we should go back to Julia and see if she could be our keynote speaker, because they have a lot of things on their plate. They have a lot of speakers that they've seen. So I love that you were proactive in pitching them to do this. And so this conference, as I mentioned, was just this November. When did you send them the proposal for the keynote?
It was probably a year before that. We had a really, really long lead time. Yeah, they were, they're extremely organized. They plan really far in advance. I think they had just wrapped up this conference for the year prior. They had just finished like taking their post-conference breath. And then they were ready to start thinking. And so, the lead time is pretty long between getting them to respond to your email, getting on the calendar, pitching the topic, them taking the topic back to the powers that be, getting the contract, right? And so it was, I would say, like 10 months before the conference, I was like signed and ready.
That is so important also to keep in mind, because for keynote slots, especially, a lot of conferences do book a year in advance, sometimes 18 months in advance of the actual conference. So for those of you listening, keep that in mind. You're not probably going to get a keynote slot a month before the event. Something happens and you already know the people. All right. So let's talk about the topic that you pitched them. So tell us what that topic was and why you felt this would be a great fit for their audience.
So they were really insistent that this was a group of individuals who needed professional development that wasn't just your typical professional development. They needed something more sophisticated than sort of the generic topics on leadership and emotional intelligence. And right, like that was sort of same old, same old. And they were really clear that this is a group of people who want to level up their careers. They love substance and takeaways and action items, but they also like to have fun. And so one topic, so I pitched them, I will say, I think this is important for your listeners too. I pitched them 3 different topics, right? Like that. And I think sometimes that's okay, right? To play a little bit. I think I hear a lot of like, have one keynote to do it perfectly, and sure, but they wanted to kind of spitball a little bit. And so I pitched them a few things. I think I pitched them something on imposter syndrome, which they were like, nah, something else. And then the thing that hit for them was this idea of building a personal board of directors. And so they were like, wait, what is that? Tell me more. And I was like, well, this is something I do with my coaching clients, where it's not enough to have one mentor. You have to have a board of people in your corner to help with your career, to help get to the next level. And this is something where I'm introducing a concept, but I'm also introducing the practice of doing it and the how, and there's takeaways, and it's tangible and it's new. And so they loved that, because they felt like, okay, it's a cool, big idea, but you can also get into the weeds with it. And they're like, these women come with notebooks and pens. They want the details, right? And so I was like, okay, it's got to be inspirational, but it's got to be detail oriented, right? It's always kind of towing that line. And so that's what we landed on.
And I love this idea of the personal board of directors, because it's a fresh topic. It's not something that they've heard before. So it definitely piqued their interest, but it still aligns with a lot of the same things that people are experiencing, whether it is imposter syndrome or stalled career growth or not knowing how to advance in their career. So it hits on that, but it's from a very fresh angle versus the same old, like, I'm just going to talk about how to strategically advance in your career.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And interestingly, there was a section that I didn't overtly call imposter syndrome in the talk, where I said, you might have this feeling like, who am I to do this? And interestingly, there were like 5 people afterwards who came up to me and said, that specific part, that question of who am I to do this, that really spoke to me, that imposter syndrome piece. And I was like, interesting. Okay. So you can really sort of work when you know that a topic is going to resonate with your audience, you can find ways to kind of give them what they need versus what the conference planners want or ask for. And I know, Carol, we're going to get into that.
Oh, yes, we are. Yes, we are. Well, and the reason I feel like that resonates with so many people, this idea of who am I to ask for this, or who am I to want this, is it goes to understanding our identity and who we are and how we want to come across and how we're perceived. And I always say that keynotes, the best keynotes, are really about helping the audience understand themselves better and where they fit into the world. Because as humans, that's ultimately what we want. And to your point, event organizers say they want the audience to have, quote, tangible takeaways and action steps and action plans. And I think they see this, again, out of the goodness of their hearts, because they feel like they want valuable content for their audiences. But I don't know. I feel like they probably have seen enough presentations over the years to know better by now, because this is what I call the expert trap. And I know, Julia, we talked about this in the very beginning of working together, that it's so easy for us to fall into the expert trap. And we did this initially, like, let's tell them all the ways that they can put together their board of directors. And then we realized that it was not going to create the 10 out of 10 keynote. So let's back up just a moment, Julia. Why did you decide that you wanted to work with someone on your keynote, specifically, finding me and speaking your brand. And because I know you create great presentations and I know you could have done a great job on this. So why did you decide to work with someone?
So I was ready to take things to the next level, right? Like I have, I think I was getting paid to talk like in the 5K to 8K range. And I was building my own content and it was good. Like exactly that way of saying like, oh, that was good. And like, that just wasn't good enough for me. I was so ready to get those stage side referrals, to just be the person people think of, to just be dynamite. And I'm sure like a lot of your listeners, I have sat in on keynotes where it's like the middle-aged white man jogs on stage to Eye of the Tiger.
I hope, oh my God, do they still do that? I really
Yes.
Yes. Okay, well, newsflash, I think that's going to become even of a bigger thing next year.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and I just was like, I'm ready. And I have to give your copywriter credit and your website and your SEO, because normally I don't work with coaches who I don't have a warm referral from. I didn't know anyone who knew you, Carol, but you came up in my internet search and I went on your website and I was like, wait, is she looking at me? Like, does she see me? Because it spoke to my soul. I was like, I'm comfortable in an academic environment. I convey information really well. I'm concise. I'm fact-based, like, yeah, maybe like a joke or two, but I'm conveying information. I'm not thinking of this as a performance, and I know it needs to be. So I need to ratchet down the academia and I need to ratchet up the show. And I have no idea how to do that. And so it's interesting. We spoke and we didn't actually work together for a little while after we spoke, but it was almost like I was on your newsletter, I was listening to your podcast. And so I was in your ecosystem even before I paid you. And so it was just like, anytime my mind strayed, I would be brought right back to you through a podcast episode that resonated or through a newsletter. And the more my panic rose about this keynote and feeling like it just wasn't going in the direction that I thought would be dynamite, the more I was like, I need Carol. I need some help. And so that's what made me pull the trigger. I was like, I need a spirit guide on this keynote to like decrease my blood pressure and just give me the assurance that it's going to be dynamite.
Well, and it was a lot of hard work. I mean, you put a lot of hard work into it. We did during our coaching sessions together. I did, brainstorming and marinating on things in between our coaching sessions to really think about how can we make this different, unusual, something that's really going to stand out. And to your point about the website copy is that, and I do have to thank my copywriter, Ashley Harvey, and actually we're doing a joint retreat in London, England next summer, all around building your bold brand voice, because she is such a great copywriter and brand messaging expert. So, but this expert trap, the reason I talk about it so much is because not only do I see so many women fall into it, but I myself fall into it. I have. And I still catch myself doing it because it is our default. It is our instinct, but we have to consciously and intentionally reel ourselves out of that, not only for our benefit, for the benefit of our audiences. So Julia, let's dig into how we shaped the keynote. And as I mentioned a little bit ago, we very assuredly started going down that expert trap, right? We mapped everything out and you're like, let's tell them exactly how to build their board of directors. So tell me what that looked like. And then how do we reel ourselves back in?
Yeah. So you spent so much extra time with me because we did several versions of this keynote. And it was funny how we both sort of fell into the expert trap the first round, right? Because I was like, oh, I have all this information. Like, let me just convey it. And you were like, great, let's convey it. Let's fit all of these stories in. And in the first round, I think I was talking about my infertility story. Like, it was like, every story you have, let's do it. And like every description, let's do it. And it was just like, we both knew it as we were doing it. We almost just had to get all the spaghetti on the wall first to just like say, I'm mixing metaphors, to like say goodbye to it. We just had to work through it. And then once we had like the first version, we took a breather and we came back and I was like, this isn't working. And you were like, yep, this isn't working. Like, this is too much information. And like, it's kind of boring. And and we were like, we both had this moment of like, we both fell into the expert trap on this one. And it's such a good reminder that having that extra person to just be your gut check can be so helpful.
I likened it to writing the first draft of a book.
Yeah.
Right. And so like, yes, like they always say your first draft is going to suck. It's not going to be what ends up being published, but you have to get it out because it's almost like you have to see, like you said, what's not working, or you have to just get all the stuff out that you think, well, maybe that would be a good idea. Maybe I should put this story in. If you don't have a place to put it, it kind of just stays in your mind and you think, well, what if I put that in? But I feel like we got it all out. And then we kind of went back to the drawing board in a lot of ways. And we're like, okay, so act 3 is the end, and we really saved that to the very, very end. We didn't work on that until probably a few weeks before your keynote, but I decided that we really needed to focus on act 2, which was the main thing. Like, how are we going to not only tell the audience about this personal board of directors and how it benefits them, but how are we going to show them what it's like? So Julia, you had already, can you tell us a little bit about what the board of directors is, what the different kind of roles are? Because then you have the idea that each role kind of represented someone in the cultural zeitgeist.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there was a lot of like ideation and spitballing here. So your board of directors has a number of roles on it. And so there's a connector. And that person is someone who essentially has a mental Rolodex and connects ideas and people. My vision was that the connector would be like a Yiddish yenta, kind of like a matchmaker. There's the mentor, who that's sort of self-explanatory. And I thought the mentor could be Yoda. And the sponsor is a very high-level person in your organization who can say your name in a room and things happen. And so I was like, that's got to be Oprah. And then there's one more that is the friend. And I was sort of like, maybe we'll do like a Martha Stewart, Snoop Dogg. We like played with what that would be. And so I had this idea that it would be really funny to have a visual of all of these people sitting around a boardroom table because no one would really expect that. And so I got there, but the how was still the big question mark because it was like, am I just telling people like what these roles are? Because even though the characters are interesting, the telling is still really boring.
Right. Because you had the characters Yoda and Snoop Dogg and Oprah, which was fun. And we had props for each of them. Like we had thought about that so that you could add those to your talk. But right to your point, it's like, okay, but then do we just like go run down the list and say, now go think of people who could be in these different roles and then go put together your board of directors and like, yes, at a conference breakout session, you could do that and have some activities, but this was a keynote on a big stage with a big audience. So we knew we had to bring it. So I remember I was working, thinking about things in between one of our sessions. And I was thinking like different audience engagement activities we could do to kind of just get the audience more involved. And all of a sudden, I'm a very visual thinker, pops into my mind is that old game show Hollywood Squares, where you had like the 9 squares like tic-tac-toe, and then they would have different celebrities. I was thinking celebrities, Oprah and Snoop Dogg and Martha Stewart. I'm like, oh, what if you had like each celebrity in one of those boxes and you could just like reveal to the audience who they were one by one. And then that's where we came up with this whole game show idea. So can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So from my perspective, I got an email from you in between. We sort of left a session off being like, let's just each go back and think. And I got an email from you. I think it was like 48 hours later. And it was like, okay, you might hate this, but ... what if we made it a game show? and you had some examples that like we didn't end up like going with, but I was just like, I think she just nailed it. Like it just was like this. It was like, that's it. Like, yes, this will be a game show. And then I had the idea that what the game show would be was that I would get people to come on stage and read poems. And so I was like so excited because I'm like, oh, I get to write poems for all these roles. And those are clues and the audience can guess it. And so, and that was really fun for me because I really like writing poems, and it's so silly to write a poem about Martha Stewart and Snoop Dogg. So
they were so good. They were so good.
Yeah, they came out really good. And that moment of doing that was like, that's when it started being fun again to write the keynotes.
Yes.
And that's when I knew we were nailing it because it was fun to write. And it was so much fun to play it out. And that's when we were just like 100 miles an hour.
And so you had these clues and you found people who were going to be attending the conference and you talked to them ahead of time to let them ask them if they would be willing to come on stage, because you weren't just going to leave it to chance and have random audience people come up to read. So you planned all this. I think you laminated the poems, the clues, so they would have that. And then you also had a call with the AV people at the conference. So can you tell us about that and what some of the things that you ended up doing there at the keynote?
Yeah, so not every conference is going to be as buttoned up and professional as this one was, with hiring an external AV vendor who was just really on top of it. But we went through all of my slides. And so the audio became a really important component of the keynote. That's always such a wild card with keynotes, no matter how good the sound guys are. And Carol, I don't know if I told you this, we had sound issues, even though the sound was like, they were so good, but it wasn't, it didn't. I'm a big believer in like moments of vulnerability help to humanize you. And so it ended up being fine. But, I have this one slide where when we transition to this act 2, where I'm like, I'm not just going to stand up here and tell you these roles. Like, that would be so boring. So we're going to make it a game show. And then I hired a voiceover actor from Fiverr or one of these freelance platforms to say, it's time to play. Guess you're bored, with like this old timey like music. And it's like the flashing neon lights. And so I was like, I really need that sound to hit. And of course it didn't. So I had like this moment of like, so just in case you didn't hear me, we're going to make it a game show, right? And he's like, so then it went on the second go. But yeah, so they sort of like knew in advance which slide was going to cue that. I had a song at the end that I needed them to play, and it was very like volume dependent, soft at the beginning, loud at the end, right? So there were some important pieces that I needed to get them on board with. But it's so great because now I know I have like the 7 bullet points that are really, really key for that AV team. And I have now bolded, these are the things that are most likely to screw up. So how can we prepare for these things? And they also were great because I was like a little bit extra. I wanted to do the like DJ bullhorn for the correct answers after the poems, like the pew, pew, pew. And they were like, we want to give you everything that your heart's desires, Julia, but like the bullhorn's not happening.
Oh, maybe the next keynote.
Yeah. So, it was like, I was like, okay, the most important things then are this and this. But yeah, working with them and then honestly showing up an hour before my stage time was so crucial because I was on the stage and I was like, here's where that hits. Nope, that volume gets higher, that right. So like that hour before the keynote was also crucial to getting it right.
Well, and this also shows how much real work goes into creating an amazing keynote. It is not just like you dust off some slides and you update a couple of things and then you roll out of bed and you show up, at your call time and you hope everything works. And this is why I am such a big advocate of conferences paying their keynote speakers and paying them well. And unfortunately, some conferences and a lot of women's conferences don't pay their keynote speakers very well. It's because you want to invest in that speaker because they're going to be much more committed because they know that it is a business relationship.
Yeah, exactly. And the things that I did that went above and beyond, they were so appreciative. Talking to attendees before my talk, that was a standout thing for these event planners because what I was able to do, it was sort of I kind of hit 2 birds with one stone, right? I got to hear from my audience in advance. And so I was like, what are your pain points? What do people misunderstand about you, right? Like all of these really meaty questions and synthesize their answers, use quotes from them in the keynote. So everyone in the audience is like, yes, she sees me. She gets it. She's speaking our language. But then at the end of those interviews, I also got to say, would you read a poem on stage? I think you would nail it, right? And so it's like I got these 2 things from these women and the conference planners were like, the fact that you took the time before this keynote to understand our audience, they felt so seen, they felt so understood. So it really was a win-win to just, and when you pay keynotes, they can take that time to do those interviews and you're not customizing the whole keynote, you're customizing 10% of it, but that 10% really stands out.
Absolutely. Yes. And okay, so we talked about Act 2, which was really this game show idea to talk about this board of directors, what it looks like, but in a very fun and engaging and interactive way. So, and then we ended up we tied up the loose ends in Act 3, but let's go back to Act 1, which is the opening. Because the opening, as we know, is really critical for setting the stage, literally, for bringing the audience in, to letting them know, what are we going to be talking about? Who is Julia? Why should we care about her? Why should we listen to her? Does she understand us? Is she relatable? Can we trust what she's saying? So so talk to us about how we decided to open the keynote. I said the royal we, but how you decided to open the keynote.
This was like, I don't know if Act 2 or this part was the hardest for us. I mean, we really struggled because, it needs to be like, so you want to be funny and self-deprecating and engaging right off the bat. And so I ended up going with just like a quick little story about my daughter first, and like taking a plane with her, and like that being a disaster, and like baby on a plane, right? It's like people can relate to that. And then we decided, instead of any other fluff, like jump right into this story of how I got demoted in my 20s. And that story was like such buy-in from the audience just immediately, because I was just, it's like my bio is like, she's a contributor to Forbes, she has a TEDx, and it's just like, everyone's just like, ugh. I hate her.
Wait, Julia, I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say, wow, she's amazing. I aspire to be her, but does she really understand where I am right now?
Okay, that's a fair phrasing.
All right.
And so I get up there and I'm saying, I was a special assistant to a C-suite person. So I had the same role that you have. And I'm walking into my performance review thinking I'm getting promoted. Obviously the story is a lot longer and a lot more funny, and I get demoted. And interestingly, actually, I didn't tell you this. I'm excited to tell you this part. So a lot of what we talked about was the importance of having a bit. And I think, a signature bit, right? That no one else can do that you do. I think the game show was a big bit, but a smaller bit was a little bit more impromptu. And that was when I'm describing the demotion. I talk about how my boss takes out the dreaded org chart. And I say, and he took his finger and he drew it lower and lower and lower and lower. And I lay flat on the ground.
Oh, good for you. I am so glad you did that.
I laid on the ground. For like 1, 2, 3 Mississippi. When I tell you, like, they were like peeing in their pants, because it's like, you're just like, that was my frame of mind in the moment. Like when I felt dead on the ground, and like the lowness on the org chart, it worked. And they're not expecting it, right? Like, I'm in this dress, I look nice, and I'm just laying. And so I think that was a really good moment of like, oh, she's going to lay down on the stage. Like, she's going to tell this story. And so from there, it was just like, they were locked in.
Well, you committed to the performance,
right,
of the keynote. And that's what that takes, really, to be willing to do that. And this is why I love improv. And this is why we do improv at our speaking workshops, because it gets you to use your body. I lay on the floor and do silly stuff and improv, because then I know I'm going to take that to the stage.
Yeah.
All right. So Julia, so we figured out the opening, which was the story about your daughter on the airplane, which was cute. Again, self-deprecating. It was funny, kind of just like lightened the mood, brought the audience in. But then you had your real story, which was the story about getting demoted. And I remember we kept cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting, because I knew from my experience helping clients with TEDx talks that less is more. The more you cut, the stronger the stories are going to be. And I know that there were some parts we ended up cutting where you're like, oh, I like that part. I'm like, yes, I like it too. But let's just see how it feels to keep cutting it down to the essence, keeping the humor, keeping the storytelling, but then keep cutting it. And I think it was much more effective.
It was so much more effective. We had one session where we had our shared Google Doc up, and you were tracking changes and you were highlighting it entire pages and just hitting delete and the red thing. And I was just like, but then like I practiced it that way the next week, and I was like, oh, that was a lot better.
Yeah, I have no sacred cows. I'm like, I am an editor galore. I will cut, because I know we can always bring it back. We can always bring it back if it feels like it's a little too empty. But I just feel like it is much better. All right, so let's talk about then the feedback you got. So you're there. You sent me a video that morning of the stage, which looks incredible, and all the chairs and the audience before people got there. You're like, oh my God. I'm like, I know you're going to be amazing. Just have fun with it. I'm so glad you did. So you do your thing. It goes great. And then what happens?
So immediately after, I get off the stage and there's just a line of people waiting to talk to me, which is such a fun feeling. And it was like talking to me, but they also wanted pictures with me. And they wanted to ask me specific follow-up questions and to tell me like what resonated with me. I had at least 3 women like break down and cry in my arms about how like something in particular I said resonated with them and changed the course of how they're going to think about their career. And so it was this mix of like, that was so fun. What an engaging first keynote, but also you made me think about something I'm doing in my life in a new way. And so I just was filled with like just gratitude for the audience and joy at feeling like this was as impactful as I had hoped it would be when I first pitched it. And so the first, I was like 25 minutes after the keynote was just like that. And then I sort of looked up and the room had cleared and the line was gone. And conference planners were sort of running around and they were like, that was freaking incredible. Like just I could see the joy on their faces, and walked out, and the sound guy sort of walked out with me and he was like, you were phenomenal. And he was like, I just have to share something funny with you, which you alluded to earlier, Carol. He was like, the tech guys I brought with me, they do like, 1 to 2 keynotes a day, like 1 to 2 conferences a day. And I overheard them saying, usually the keynotes at these things like kind of suck, but she was freaking incredible. And I was like, that's the highest compliment. I'll take it. And
Right.
then the AV guy was like, let me know how I can be of service to you and refer you. And like, because I would love to work with you again. And I was like, you were such a pleasure. Like, and so it was such an interesting, like that was a connection that was made from just sort of being a team player and like being happy to work with other people other than the conference planners.
Yes, I love that, Julia. And in the feedback was not, wow, those are a lot of great takeaways that I wrote down in my notebook.
Yes. And, they did. And like, but it was, what it was though, which I loved. It was a lot less writing in notebooks and this phones taking pictures. And when I tell you, no, not a single person was like on their phone. I do a lot of audience scans during my talk. I speak to the audience. Nobody was on their phones. Like people were so engaged. The only time phones came out were, the slides with the quotes, like that snapping pictures. And yeah, so like there were takeaways, but it was an experience. Like we gave them an experience.
Exactly. An experience they'll remember, an experience that really they felt. They not only they thought it in their mind, but they felt it in their bodies, not only because of the sensory elements that you have, but because of this idea of, wow, I can make a difference in my career in a way that I didn't see was possible before, or in a way that I didn't even think of before.
Yeah. Yeah. And I had a number of people say to me, what an empowering way to start this conference, because now the mindset that I'm using going into all of these other sessions is totally different. And so I think the keynote opening the conference, that was another piece of specific feedback that I got, was like this as the opening was very powerful. So that's something else that I can take with me as I pitch this to other conferences, right? It's like, what's your opening keynote slot? This is what this does for participants.
Absolutely. And Julia, the other thing that you did is that you hired a videography company to come and film you, because even though a lot of events will film on their own, you don't necessarily know when you're going to get the footage or how much of the footage, or if they're going to film the whole thing. So I highly recommended that you bring in your own video team. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So it was super easy, and I really appreciated you pushing me on it. I initially asked the conference planners if they knew anyone. They didn't. I asked someone in my network who lives in Miami. She recommended someone awesome. It was, it was an expense, but it wasn't terrible. And I'm not having them edit anything. It's just kind of raw footage that I'll get and eventually put into a like more high level sizzle reel than the one I have now when I have more gigs accumulated. But it was so great. I mean, they were so professional, and it was just, the focus was just on me. The goal was me. It wasn't the whole conference. And so they brought 2 cams, which was great. One was stationary at different points in the audience, and the other followed me. And I was really intentional about all of the different shots I wanted to get, and we got it beforehand. So we had that right before I went on stage, like, hey, I'm Julia. I'm about to go on stage to talk to this audience about this. I'm super excited. Follow me. And then he was right behind me when I ran up on stage. So he got the jogging up on stage shot. He got the like leaving the stage. I baked it. This was sort of a little bit sly, but the end of my keynote, I get everyone to stand and put their arms around each other and do a sing along. So then I walk off stage, everyone's already standing and clapping. So it's sort of, you like stage the standing ovation a little bit.
Oh my God, so brilliant.
Right. And so then the camera pans as I'm walking off stage, everyone's standing doing this, right? So it's an amazing visual, and it's an amazing feeling for me and for the audience to have that. And so we captured all of those moments. And I wouldn't have done that if I just went with conference videography. Like they wouldn't have. Oh, and testimonials right after. So my camera guy is standing right next to me. Every person who's coming up to me in line and saying these amazing things, I'm like, would you just repeat that for this guy over here? And they did, right? And so I was able to get these sort of real time, like, what did you think of it? How did you feel? Testimonials.
Amazing. Well, Julia, congratulations on really all the hard work that you put into this. Not only pitching yourself for this keynote, but all the speaking work you did leading up to it. Obviously, all the hard work you did on the keynote itself, all the practicing and rehearsing and logistics and all of that. I mean, it is so well deserved. And I am so excited for you to take this on the road and to speak to a lot more places.
Thank you for everything, Carol. I appreciate you more than you could know.
If you would like to work together on your signature talk and keynote to make sure that you don't get stuck in the expert trap, check out our coaching programs at speakingyourbrand.com/coaching. Again, that's speakingyourbrand.com/coaching. Until next time, thanks for listening.